Everyone knows Rome fell in the year 476, but that is only half the story. The other half survived for almost another 1,000 years, ruled from a single spectacular city. We call them the Byzantines, but here is the strange thing, they never once called themselves that. The word Byzantine was invented by scholars more than a century after the empire had already vanished. To the very end they called themselves Romans, and their ruler the Emperor of the Romans. Their capital, Constantinople, was for centuries the richest and most dazzling city on the entire earth. It sat on a knife edge between Europe and Asia, guarding the crossroads of two continents. For 1,000 years, it held back invasion after invasion, with towering triple walls. Its armies wielded a terrifying secret weapon, a liquid fire that burned even on water. Its emperors gave us the foundation of modern law, and the split of the Christian Church. This is the full story, from a Roman capital moving east to a final desperate siege. 1,200 years of glory, betrayal, fire and faith, all in the next 20 minutes. So let us go back to the beginning, to the year the world's center began to shift. By the 4th century, the old city of Rome was no longer the true center of power. The empire's threats and its wealth had drifted eastward, toward Persia and the rich Greek provinces. In the year 330, Emperor Constantine chose a bold new home for his throne. He picked an ancient Greek trading town called Byzantium, perched on a narrow strategic strait. Its position was perfect, surrounded by water on 3 sides and easy to defend. Constantine poured imperial gold into it, building palaces, churches, forums, and a great racing arena. He renamed the city Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and declared it a new Rome. Unlike old Rome, this capital was Christian from its very birth, dotted with crosses and shrines. Constantine had earlier won power under a vision of a cross blazing in the sky. He summoned bishops from across the world to settle what Christians everywhere should actually believe. The city grew astonishingly fast, drawing merchants, scholars, and settlers from every corner of the empire. Within a few generations, it had become the beating heart of the Roman world. The center of gravity had shifted for good, and the future would be decided here. The Roman Empire had simply grown too vast for one man to rule alone. Messages could take weeks to cross it, and enemies pressed on every distant frontier. To cope, emperors increasingly split the workload, ruling the west and east as a team. In the year 395, Emperor Theodosius I died, and the split became permanent. He left the empire to his 2 young sons, one taking the west, one the east. The Latin-speaking west was ruled from Italy, poorer and battered by constant invasions. The Greek-speaking east was ruled from Constantinople, wealthier, safer, and far more populous. The 2 halves spoke different languages, prayed in different styles, and drifted steadily apart. Officially it was still one Roman Empire, sharing laws and a single legal tradition. But in practice, the West was already crumbling while the East was quietly thriving. Waves of Goths, Vandals, and Huns hammered the western provinces year after year. The East used its greater wealth to pay off enemies and buy itself precious time. The stage was set for one half to fall and the other to endure. Through the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire slowly bled to death. Barbarian kingdoms carved up its provinces, and its emperors became powerless puppets. In the year 476, a Germanic general named Oudoacer seized Italy itself. He deposed the last Western emperor, a boy fittingly named Romulus Augustulus. Rather than crown himself emperor, Oudoacer sent the imperial regalia east to Constantinople. The message was clear: there was no longer any need for an emperor in the West. Historians would later mark this as the fall of Rome, the end of the ancient world. But in Constantinople, life carried on almost exactly as it always had. The Eastern emperor still ruled millions, still called himself Roman, still enforced Roman law. As far as the East was concerned, the Roman Empire had not fallen at all. It had simply shed a weak, poor limb and continued on from its stronger half. This surviving empire would endure for nearly another 1,000 years, after Rome's supposed end. And soon, one ambitious emperor would dream of taking the lost West back. In the year 527, a farmer's nephew from the Balkans took the throne. His name was Justinian, and he dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire to its ancient glory. Beside him ruled his wife Theodora, a fiercely clever woman of humble, scandalous origins. Court gossip whispered she had once been a lowly actress and performer in the theatre. Justinian sent his brilliant general Belisarius to reconquer the lost lands of the West. First they smashed the Vandal kingdom and retook the rich shores of North Africa. Then they invaded Italy, fighting a long and brutal war to seize it from the Goths. For a brief shining moment, Rome itself flew the imperial banner once again. The empire's official historian, Procopius, praised these wars in glowing public accounts, but in secret, that same historian penned a scandalous hidden book of poisonous gossip. It branded Theodora a wanton schemer, and Justinian a demon in human form. The reconquests looked glorious, but they drained the treasury and exhausted the army. And before the wars were even won, the capital itself nearly went up in flames. The people of Constantinople were obsessed with one wild spectacle above all others: chariot racing. The fans split into rival factions, the Blues and the Greens, who hated each other fiercely. These factions were like political gangs, powerful enough to shake the government itself. In the year 532, both sides turned their fury on Emperor Justinian at once. Their rallying cry was a single word: Nika, meaning conquer or victory. The riot exploded, and mobs set fire to half of the great city. The magnificent main cathedral burned to the ground amid the chaos. The rioters even proclaimed a rival emperor, and prepared to storm the palace. Justinian nearly fled the city, packing ships with treasure to escape by sea. But Empress Theodora stopped him, declaring that royal purple made a fine burial shroud. Shamed into action, Justinian sent his loyal generals to crush the uprising. The troops trapped the rioters inside the racing arena and bolted every exit. There they slaughtered 30,000 people in a single day of horrifying bloodshed. With the riots crushed, Justinian rebuilt the ruined city grander than it had ever been. His greatest project was a colossal new cathedral, to replace the one lost in the fires. It was called Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, and it stunned everyone who saw it. Its enormous dome seemed to float on light, held up as if by heaven itself. When it was finished, Justinian is said to have cried that he had outdone King Solomon. But Justinian's most lasting achievement was not made of stone at all. Roman law had become a chaotic mess of over 3 million lines of contradictory rulings. He gathered his finest legal minds to condense it into one clear, ordered code. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. It governed the Byzantine Empire for the next 900 years, and astonishingly, it became the very foundation of legal systems across Europe today. One emperor had thus reshaped both the skyline and the laws of the Western world. Yet all this glory came at a terrible cost. The empire would soon have to pay. By the 7th century, the overstretched empire was sliding into deep crisis. A capable general named Heraclius seized the throne to save the state from collapse. He made a historic change, declaring Greek the empire's official language instead of Latin. From now on, these Romans would speak, pray, and rule entirely in Greek. This completed the slow transformation from a Latin-Roman world into a Greek-Byzantine one. First, Heraclius faced a deadly old enemy, the mighty Sasanian Persian Empire. The Persians had seized Jerusalem and even carried off the holy relic of the true cross. In a stunning campaign, Heraclius struck deep into Persia and shattered their armies. He won back Jerusalem and returned the sacred cross in triumph. But the long war had left both great empires utterly exhausted and drained. At that precise moment, a new and unstoppable force erupted out of the Arabian deserts. The armies of Islam swept north, conquering with astonishing speed. Within a decade, the empire lost Syria, Egypt, and Jerusalem forever. Reeling from these losses, the empire now faced a fight for its very survival. The victorious Arab armies set their sights on the ultimate prize, Constantinople itself. Twice, mighty fleets and armies laid siege to the great walled city. The first prolonged siege came in the 670s and dragged on for years. The city's triple land walls proved almost impossible to break through. But the empire's deadliest defense was a mysterious and terrifying weapon. It was called Greek fire, a liquid flame that could not be put out by water. Byzantine ships sprayed it across the sea, setting entire enemy fleets ablaze. Its exact recipe was such a closely guarded secret that it is still lost today. A second, even larger siege struck in the year 717. A brutal winter, starvation and Greek fire together destroyed the attacking forces. Constantinople had held firm and shielded all of Europe from conquest. This single city had become the unbreakable bulwark of the Christian world. Having survived its enemies, the empire nearly tore itself apart over a question of faith. The dispute was about icons, holy painted images of Christ and the saints. For centuries, believers had prayed to these sacred images and treasured them dearly. But some emperors came to believe this was idolatry, forbidden by God's law. In the year 726, Emperor Leo III ordered the images destroyed. Soldiers smashed statues, whitewashed frescoes, and burned countless priceless works of art. Those who defended the icons were persecuted, imprisoned, and sometimes killed. The empire split bitterly between the image breakers and the image lovers. The bitter struggle raged on and off for more than a century. Monks in remote monasteries secretly hid and protected the sacred images. Finally, in the year 843, the icons were restored for good. The Church celebrated this victory as the great triumph of orthodoxy. With its faith settled, the empire was ready to enter a dazzling golden age. Under a new line of emperors, the Macedonian dynasty, the empire roared back to life. This was a glittering golden age of wealth, learning, and military might. Scholars copied ancient Greek texts, and artists filled churches with shimmering mosaics. The empire's most feared ruler was Emperor Basil II. He spent decades locked in a savage war against the neighboring Bulgarian kingdom. In the year 1014, he crushed the Bulgarian army completely. Then he committed one of the most chilling acts in all of history. He took 15,000 prisoners and blinded 99 of every 100 men. Each 100th man was left with a single eye to guide the rest home. Legend says the Bulgarian ruler died of shock the moment he saw them return. For this, Basil earned his terrifying nickname, the Bulgar-Slayer. He doubled the empire's size and filled its treasury to overflowing. He also drew the powerful Kievan Rus into the Orthodox Christian fold. Even in its golden age, a deep crack was splitting the Christian world in two. The Christians of the Greek East and the Latin West had drifted far apart. They argued over how to pray, what bread to use, and who truly led the Church. The Pope in Rome claimed supreme authority over all Christians everywhere. The Patriarch of Constantinople utterly refused to accept the Pope's command. Rome even backed its claims with an ancient document called the Donation of Constantine. It supposedly gave the Pope power over the West, granted by the first Christian emperor. But centuries later, that famous document was exposed as a complete forgery. In the year 1054, the two sides finally reached breaking point. Papal envoys marched into the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia during a service. They slammed a decree of excommunication down upon the high altar and stormed out. The Patriarch answered by excommunicating them straight back. Christianity was now permanently split into Catholic West and Orthodox East. Then, in the year 1071, catastrophe struck out of the East. A new people, the Seljuk Turks, had risen and pushed toward the empire's frontier. The Byzantine Emperor led a great army east to crush them at a place called Manzikert. But treachery and poor command turned the battle into a total disaster. The army was destroyed, and the emperor himself was captured alive. The defeat threw open the gates of Asia Minor, the empire's vital heartland. Turkish settlers poured in, and the empire lost the lands that fed and manned its armies. The state teetered on the very edge of complete collapse. Then a shrewd new emperor, Alexios Komnenos, seized power to save it. He stabilized the finances, rebuilt the army, and clawed back precious territory. Desperate for troops, he appealed to the Pope in the West for military help. The response was overwhelming, the massive armies of the First Crusade. But inviting these armed Westerners in would prove a fateful and dangerous gamble. For a while, the Crusades brought uneasy cooperation between East and West. But greed, debt, and suspicion were about to explode into outright disaster. In the year 1204, the Fourth Crusade set out to reclaim the Holy Land. But the Crusaders owed a crushing debt to the merchants of Venice for their transport. Unable to pay, they were tempted to divert their entire army against Constantinople. The world's greatest Christian city was attacked by fellow Christians. The soldiers had to twist their own consciences to justify the assault. One abbot excused his looting by claiming sacrilege was fine in a holy cause. The Crusaders breached the walls and poured into the shining city. For 3 days they plundered, burned, and desecrated the greatest city in Christendom. They stripped the cathedrals of gold, relics, and priceless ancient treasures. They set up their own short-lived Latin Empire on the city's ruins. The empire was shattered and would never truly recover its former power. The Byzantines were down, but they were not entirely finished. Refugee Greeks fled and set up small successor states in exile. From the city of Nicaea, they patiently plotted to take their capital back. For over 50 years, the Latins clung to the conquered city. Then, in the year 1261, a Byzantine force found the city lightly guarded. They slipped inside and retook Constantinople almost without a fight. The Emperor Michael Palaiologos entered in triumph and restored the ancient throne. But the city he reclaimed was a ghost of its former self. Whole districts lay ruined and abandoned since the brutal sack decades before. The restored empire held little more than Greece and the land around the capital. Its treasury was empty, its army small, and dangerous enemies pressed on every side. The Byzantines survived, but only as a minor power clinging to survival. And in the east, a terrifying new power was steadily rising to swallow them. Over the next century, the empire shrank steadily toward a tiny sliver of land. A new and mighty force was rising fast, the Ottoman Turks. One by one, the Ottomans swallowed the empire's remaining towns and provinces. Soon the once mighty empire was little more than the city of Constantinople itself. The emperors grew so poor they pawned the crown jewels just to survive. By the 1450s, the city was ringed by Ottoman land on every side. A young, ambitious sultan named Mehmed II was determined to take it. Then fate handed him a terrible new weapon, born from Byzantine poverty. A skilled Hungarian engineer named Urban I offered his cannons to the Byzantines, but the empire was so broke it could not even pay him a daily wage. So Urban defected and offered his terrible skills to the Sultan instead. He built Mehmed a monstrous cannon weighing 17 tons, able to hurl huge stone balls. The weapon meant to save the city would now be the instrument of its doom. In the spring of 1453, the great final siege began. Perhaps 80,000 Ottoman soldiers surrounded barely 7,000 defenders. The Emperor Constantine the 11th refused every demand to surrender the city. Day after day, Urban's giant cannon pounded the ancient walls with huge stone shot. The defenders desperately repaired each breach through the night. To protect the harbour, the Byzantines had stretched a huge iron chain across its mouth. The chain blocked the Ottoman fleet from entering the sheltered Golden Horn. So Mehmed attempted something almost unbelievable to get around it. He had his men build a greased wooden road over the hills behind the city. Then they dragged roughly 70 warships overland, straight over the mountain. The ships slid down the far side and splashed into the harbour behind the chain. The stunned defenders now faced attack from the water they thought was safe. The city was now surrounded and running out of men, food and hope. On the 29th of May, 1453, the final assault came. Wave after wave of attackers threw themselves at the exhausted defenders. The defenders held off assault after assault through the long, desperate night. But a small gate was left unlocked, and the Ottomans poured through. They raised their banners on the towers, and the defence began to crumble. The last emperor, Constantine XI, threw off his imperial insignia. He drew his sword and charged into the fray as an ordinary soldier. He was never seen again, dying somewhere in the streets of his falling city. After 1100 years, the Roman Empire had finally come to its end. Sultan Mehmed rode in triumph to the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia. He gave thanks inside and ordered the city made his glorious new capital. Constantinople became Istanbul, the shining heart of the Ottoman Empire. The empire that had guarded Europe for 1,000 years was gone forever. The Byzantine Empire had fallen, but its vast shadow still stretches over our world. Remember, its people never once called themselves Byzantine. That name came much later. Scholars invented the term more than 100 years after the empire had vanished. Its greatest gift may be Justinian's law code, still shaping European law today. Its scholars preserved the ancient Greek texts that later sparked the Renaissance. Fleeing Greek thinkers carried this precious knowledge west into Italy. The Orthodox Christian faith it spread still guides millions across the world. Russia and Eastern Europe inherited its faith, its art and its imperial dreams. Its shimmering mosaics and soaring domes still inspire architects and artists today. And Hagia Sophia still stands, having witnessed the whole extraordinary story. For over 1,000 years, this empire was the last living link to ancient Rome. It shielded Europe, preserved its learning, and shaped the faith of half a continent. The Byzantines are gone, but in law, faith and memory, Rome truly never died.